I ultimately made my slumlord lose every single property he owned. His freedom. And his fortune. Landing him in prison for a long time. And it all started with a broken heater in the dead of winter. I had just been released from prison and was desperate for a fresh start. A chance to rebuild my life. So when I found an apartment, I was genuinely happy that someone was willing to take a chance on me. The landlord. A man I'll call Mr. Silas. Even had the nerve to call himself a good person in court later on. But I quickly learned that was a lie. For the first few months, everything was fine. But then winter arrived. And with it, the cold. The building's heat just died. I called Silas. No answer. I called again. His voicemail was full. Packed with messages from all the other tenants who were slowly turning into ice blocks in their own homes. It took 3 whole days just to get him on the phone. When I finally did, his response was cold and dismissive. He told me the law gave him a reasonable amount of time to fix it. His idea of reasonable was 2 more weeks. 2 weeks with no heat. While we all huddled in our kitchens, using our ovens for warmth, practically camping in our own apartments just to stay alive. Then Silas got his electricity bill for the building. Seeing the spike from all the ovens running 24/7, he tried to illegally raise everyone's rent to cover it. When the city obviously shut that down, he just refused to pay the bill. The power was cut. And now we had nothing. Silas made a critical mistake right then. He thought he was dealing with powerless tenants he could bully. He had no idea that his greed had just armed the one person who would meticulously engineer his downfall. That's when my obsessive-compulsive side took over. And I went into full-on research mode. I devoured every federal, state, and city law concerning landlord-tenant rights. It wasn't just a few minor issues. The number of violations I found was terrifying. I studied building codes. I inspected the condition of his other properties, which was easy since I was already friends with many of his tenants or had been inside to fix things myself. Like burst pipes from the freeze or failing outlets due to his shoddy, dangerous wiring. Silas had enraged every single one of his tenants. They all wanted to testify against him. But the financial hardship he'd put them through made it impossible for them to risk it. So, I started to formulate a plan to force his hand. But Silas had a plan of his own. On January 2nd, at 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the piercing scream of smoke alarms. I was on the top floor. And while my apartment was clear, I opened the door to the back hall and was hit by a solid wall of thick, black smoke. I screamed for my girlfriend to get out and scrambled downstairs, pounding on every tenant's door, shouting fire. I helped get as many people out as I could. But no one was answering on the floor where the fire was. And I knew there were supposed to be children in that apartment. I was panicking until the fire department arrived and started breaking down doors. After the fire was extinguished, the investigation began. And that's when I saw it. I witnessed Silas himself slip an envelope, visibly stuffed with cash, to the sister of the woman who lived in the apartment where the fire started. 2 weeks later, the fire marshal's report came back: arson. The tenant had used hairspray to torch the place and tried to hide the can in a hole she'd punched in the wall. This was the same woman whose sister I saw take money from my landlord. Ironically, she was the only one in the building who had paid rent, having just moved in 2 days before. Her sister and the kids had moved out the day before the fire. I walked up to Silas, looked him dead in the eye, and said, I know what you did. And I'm not going to rest until you lose every single one of these buildings. My mission had changed. This wasn't just about repairs anymore. This was about justice. I started collecting stories from his other tenants. The floodgates opened. He was accused of everything imaginable, ripping off employees, theft, grand theft auto, bank fraud, and more. I needed more than just stories. I needed proof. So I hatched a new plan. I approached him, acting friendly, and reminded him I was a computer tech. As it happened, he had some broken computers and network problems he needed help with. I was in. We worked out a deal for me to fix his tech in exchange for back rent. This revealed Silas's greatest fatal flaw, his arrogance. He saw me as just a tenant, someone beneath him. And in his condescension, he handed me the very keys to his destruction. I went to his office. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and entitlement. As I sat at his desk, my heart was pounding. I knew he wouldn't honor our deal. But that was never the point. I got his passwords and logins. While pretending to run diagnostics, I plugged in my portable hard drive. The progress bar for copying his entire hard drive seemed to move in slow motion. Every creak of the building, every car that passed outside, made me jump. I then logged into his business email and copied everything. At the same time, I sent his financial records to my Wi-Fi printer in my apartment next door, praying he wouldn't hear the quiet whirring through the wall. After I fixed his network, I went home and opened the files. It was a treasure trove. It was more than enough. Armed with a mountain of digital evidence, my first call was to code enforcement. I gave them a list of every violation in every building, including the illegal electrical work he did in his new office without a single permit. They launched an investigation immediately. That very night, a 7-day eviction notice was taped to my door. My roommate was terrified, but I told him to trust the plan. We went to court. Silas stood there, smug and confident. I stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," I began, "I have here proof of a clear and ongoing violation of the Warranty of Habitability Act. This is a law that simply states a landlord must provide a safe and livable home." The judge looked at my evidence, photos, documents, the history of the heating failure. The eviction was thrown out on the spot, and the court ordered Silas to immediately repair my apartment while I was still living in it. My roommate just looked at me and joked that I should seriously consider going to law school, that I'd already found my specialty. The next month, another eviction notice came. Silas was hemorrhaging money. I had started teaching the other tenants about their rights, and people were legally withholding rent. He kept dragging me to court, and he kept losing, getting hit with more fines from the court and code enforcement with every appearance. His ship was sinking fast. Meanwhile, the woman who set the fire was arrested for arson. It turned out this was her second attempt. An accidental electrical fire on New Year's Day was also ruled intentional. Silas was now officially under investigation for conspiracy to commit arson. He tried to evict me again for non-payment of rent. I presented my evidence and cited the Landlord Retaliation Act, which protects tenants who report their landlords to government agencies. I could prove his eviction notice was a direct response to my call to code enforcement. The judge didn't even want to hear what Silas had to say. I won. Again. The final nail in his coffin came from his own shoddy workmanship. We had all bought electric heaters to survive the winter and informed the power company that Silas had illegally required tenants to pay for their own power after he shut it off. An investigation revealed his wiring was a tangled, illegal mess. He had wired apartments to run off of each other. And the building's common areas were tied into the wiring of every single unit. According to local law, a landlord is responsible for power to all common areas. Because of his illegal setup, it was physically impossible for him to disconnect our power without also illegally disconnecting the common areas. The power company turned everything back on and legally locked his ability to shut it off until he paid thousands of dollars to have the entire building rewired properly. Thousands we all knew he didn't have. Silas was in a full-blown panic. He was losing every court case. Tenants were legally withholding rent. He couldn't shut off services. And the fines were piling up into a mountain of debt. One by one, his buildings were condemned. By law, he was required to pay for the relocation of every tenant. Of course, he couldn't. He was finally arrested while trying to illegally sell 3 buildings the city had already confiscated, plus another that was condemned. But I still wasn't done. He had caused so much suffering. I packaged up every piece of financial data I had copied from his hard drive, the records, the internal memos, everything, and sent it all to the IRS. I gave the same package to local authorities. It's been 3 years. I have a new apartment with a decent landlord. Every one of Silas's old properties has been sold, completely renovated, and is now filled with happy tenants. And as for Silas? He lost everything. He's serving multiple sentences for fraud and a list of other crimes. And the investigations aren't even finished yet. The charges just keep coming. Somewhere in a prison cell. I'm sure he regrets the day he ever met me. Some might look at what I did and call it nuclear revenge. That I completely annihilated the man's life. But the moral of the story is simple: don't be a predator like Silas. Because you never know when your victim will decide to become the moral enforcer. So, that leads me to ask you, what's the worst thing a landlord has ever done to you? And how did you handle it?